Welcome to Innovating with Scott Amyx. This is your host, Scott, and I'm joined by Bird Blitch, who is the co-founder and CEO at Patientco. Welcome.
It's great to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me on board, and looking forward to spending time with you this afternoon.
All right. So, Bird, my understanding is that at an early age, I think age 26, you started one of your first companies, Broadswords, which focus on telco as well as expense management. Tell us about that journey and your experience there.
Sure. Well, when I got out of college, I looked around a lot at some of the growth sectors, and one of those was telecom. With all the changes around in telecom, what we quickly learned was managing those telecom services were a big challenge. 9 out of 16 times, there's a problem with your telecommunications bill. So we quickly got into the expense management side of the house and learned that if you're an IT director for a large organization, managing those bills, not just the circuits, but the bills and the expenses, is very challenging. We've all had it looking at our own telecom bill. It's hard to understand. And so we took that problem and started solving for it and innovating off of that. And that was the real launch of Broadswords.
Yeah, I love businesses that are as close as possible to the cash flow, the revenue line. So I think that's a terrific business model, and that eventually led you to something else. I think it's interesting because your experience in expense management eventually ended up taking a slightly different focus, which is what you're doing today. And how does that tie into having your first child?
Yeah, well, if I go back to the telecom bill. I used to say there's never a more challenging bill to try to understand. You've got tariffs and you've got different sets of services from different sets of carriers, especially back in the day. That's hard. Until you go through what we went through with my wife, you go into a hospital, you have a great clinical experience. Doctors, nurses, they go above and beyond. And then you start trying to understand the cost of all those services. And I quickly learned, hey, there's only one bill that's harder to understand than a telecom bill. That's a healthcare bill, and so that's where this journey with Patientco started.
So I just want to be clear. It's not just simply trying to make the bill more understandable for the receiver, but there's also quite a bit of work that's being done on the back end on behalf, in this case, for healthcare providers, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, what's different here, and what we are very passionate about, is so many technologies that the clinicians work off of are not designed for patients to work off of. And in the world today that we live in, we need patients and doctors and nurses all on the same page. So it's the clinical side of the journey that we all care about because we want to get healthy, we want to understand our medications, but that goes hand in hand with the financial journey, being able to understand the paths of care. And so we felt like it's important to build technology that allows the health systems and the doctors, those are called providers, to be on the same page with the patients and help them understand and see, together on one platform so that they can solve issues together and really come together so that healthcare can be more affordable.
Now, let's get into a little bit more depth in the sense of, to help the listeners better understand, what exactly is happening on the healthcare payment side where it's less than optimal? Well, there's a lot of inefficiencies there. And if you think about, there's another group we need to insert into this area called the payer. And we as consumers think of that as the insurance company. So first you're going to go to a doctor. You're going to have an encounter. So they mark up the types of services that you've experienced there. Then that turns into a claim. The claim goes to the payer or insurance company to get paid. And there's always a remainder after, which we call the patient liability. And that's what we see as patients. Now, the big change here, got to throw in a fourth one to make it a little more complex, is the employer. So many times in America, the employer sponsors that health plan as a benefit to the employee. And as costs have continued to go up over time, what's happened is a big problem has emerged. employers aren't able to absorb that cost year after year. So something interesting has happened. A deductible has been created where a lot of that cost gets passed back to the employee or the patient or the consumer, and we see that as a deductible. And that has very large implications for health systems and for us as patients. That is the problem that we've been innovating around essentially since day one.
All right. And how has a problem of essentially cascading down to the patients that is responsible for the deductibles as well as the liability portion, how has that really changed or evolved since the Affordable Cares Act?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's changed in a lot of ways. So the ACA was more about giving access to everybody for this right of healthcare that we talk about. It didn't really solve for the affordability crisis that we're facing, not just today, but even yesterday as the costs increase. And so what the ACA, you had exchanges, you provided access, but at the end of the day, to control those costs, the ACA and other payers felt like by creating consumerism. That's a new term that we hear a lot of. Consumerism is basically putting the onus of some of healthcare, those costs as burdens onto patients, and therefore we want to shop. Therefore, we want to understand what our deductible might be. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we want to understand what's in network or out of network. But that also causes us to pay attention to finding the right care at the right cost. And that is a whole new area of innovation that we see being pushed today.
Yeah, that's interesting because now there is a transference of liability to the consumers. Now they have to actually do a lot more due diligence to make sure that from a benefit to cost perspective, that they're really thinking through the kinds of right options. Just to help the listeners get a little bit more concrete sense, can you walk us through maybe a couple of case studies around how your startup is solving this real pain point, both on the healthcare side and the payer side, but also on the patient side?
Yeah, so the name of the company is Patientco. Everything we think about is with the patient in mind first. So it's technology that's purpose-built for patients from a ground floor up. I'll give you 3 quick examples. Communications. So we're defining or redefining in an innovative way how patients are communicated to around these cost elements. Not just on post-service, but at point of service and pre-service. Wouldn't it be nice to know ahead of time whether your service costs $2,000, $200, or $20? So that's item number 1. Another area is trying to create, not everybody can pay that healthcare bill. So making it more affordable by creating financing options that actually, once again, put the patient first and don't create such a liability that, we see some tough things in healthcare. It's the number 1 cause of bankruptcy for the millennials. And, that's not a good stat that healthcare wants to be hanging their hat on. So that's a problem that deserves to be solved for. And then I think the third one is the way that we integrate into the healthcare system's existing technologies means that we can help them do more with less. We can help them process these dollars faster, and all the work that comes with the confusion of processing these claims in dollars. If we can create efficiencies there, then we're able to allow the patient to self-serve more, and that's a good thing. Like anytime technology allows you or me to do more because we understand it, we control it, we have access to it, we're going to use it more. And that's a good thing for healthcare too, because that will keep people healthy as people use their healthcare even more.
Yeah. So really a lot of win-wins for all the parties involved, but certainly for the healthcare industry as they look to create frictionless, seamless experience on the front end as well as the back end. And you're actually making sure that there is higher payment received, essentially, because if people are aware of what things cost and they make conscious decisions around treatment, they're also going to recognize that they're going to be able to follow through with that payment as well. So a lot of
That's a
compliance
great
all
point.
around. Um,
Yes.
how does COVID-19 play into this? Because I think one of the things that we're hearing about is that people are being hit with bills that are astronomical that just came out of nowhere. How is your
Yeah.
process and technology helping to alleviate both on the patient side, but also help collect on the healthcare side?
Yeah. Well, so, first, just to end up where you left off, if people understand it and they feel like they're in control of it, they're most of the time going to pay that. And that's an important dollar for the healthcare system today because it can represent 20 to 33% of their revenue. And when you think through that dynamic, that is a big deal for healthcare systems that have thin margins. So back to your question, and how do we solve I want to make sure I'm answering that specifically. All right, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, so it's really around COVID. So patients have been hit with bills
Yeah,
after going into the hospital for maybe a test with
right.
$10,000 plus bill. How is your system potentially helping to resolve some of these discrepancies?
Yeah, well, first thing we do is we make sure that people aren't billed incorrectly. And we have a lot of systems and checks that do some balances so that, first of all, if you receive a digital bill or a digital estimate, one thing, it shouldn't be a surprise bill. We've read a lot about those in the industry where you receive surprise billing, and it's a very discomforting thing. So we have ways to try to, if you imagine a big stack of bills going out in the mail, going through and auditing those to make sure that the right ones go out and not the wrong ones. The wrong ones going out create a dissatisfied experience, which is the worst way to end up a great clinical experience. The second thing is we do a lot of translating. So all these CPT codes that only doctors really understand and nurses really understand, but patients don't, we translate those into what I call, stuff that you and I can talk about that we understand just as if we were walking down the street together talking about some of our symptoms. And that creates a lot of comfort too. And then I think the third thing just around COVID-19 in general is, people aren't going into the doctor as much. Elective surgeries have been postponed. Unless you're really having a heart attack or some other, major health crisis, the CDC is advised to stay home. So that means telemedicine is a big way that we can help providers, nurses and doctors reach these patients. And so we're helping make sure the financial experience is there and it's coupled together with the clinical experience through telehealth, which is a big growth area for us, we feel.
Well, terrific that you guys are bridging a big discrepancy between the clinical side with the patient side. And I think the example of the translation of the codes to something that's understandable for patients is a perfect example of that. For the remaining time that we have, can you share a product or project failure and lessons learned that you can share with others?
Well, there are so many. I do feel like lessons learned are the best way you can use to get to better. So anyone that's focusing on innovation, whether you're in a large corporation and you're in an innovation group, or you're a one-person entrepreneur starting off or down the path for a business, and certainly everywhere in between, lessons learned, we learn the most from our failures and not necessarily our successes, right? An analogy I like to give is when you're out swinging the golf club, if you hit it well, it feels good, but it doesn't make you really learn anything. When you shank it, you sit there and start to study what can you do better to improve your swing. So I have so many lessons learned, Scott, around raising capital, around requirements, product market fit. I think if I were to group them all, together and put some themes around one or two, by far the biggest lessons I've learned from not just one, but a couple of product failures as we roll them out to the marketplace is not listening to the customer enough. We talk about product market fit all the time. innovation is meaningless if people aren't using the product that's built to solve the problem. And so, and I just think through all the time, all my experiences around really staying focused on listening and then following up on that and tracking usage. I mean, every great product manager, every great engineer wants to see their product used. And so many times these things, what I call nice to haves, they're not really need to haves. You want to be a need to have product, and only then, and very few are, can you scale a business around solving a very complex problem and making it simple, because you started off listening and you incorporated the customer who's feeling the pain points every single day into your solution.
Terrific. So on that note, I've been joined by Bird Blitch, who is the CEO of Patientco. Thanks for joining today.
Scott, thank you so much.